Author is funded by the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, supporting writers from pen to publication since 1955. To learn more about the PNWA and their yearly conference, please go to pnwa.org.
Hello, this is Brian Mercer for Author Magazine. Today I'm speaking with Hay House author Teal Swan. Teal Swan is an internationally recognized spiritual leader and an influential new voice in the field of metaphysics. She survived years of abuse before escaping her abuser at age 19 and beginning her own process of recovery and transformation. Her latest book is Shadows Before Dawn, Finding the Light of Self-Love Through Your Darkest Times. Hi Teal, welcome to Author Magazine.
Hello.
First of all, let me congratulate you on your book. It's an amazing, amazing book. It's one of those books that should be on every shelf, in every glove compartment, on everyone's saddlebag. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
So one of the things about your books is that they're always full of great content. There's absolutely no fluff there. and you have so much to say, and you have so much knowledge on a host of topics. My first question to you is, of all the books you could have written, why write one about self-love?
Well, basically, it went like this. I was giving a bunch of talks, which culminated in a radio show about the fact that the root of everything really boils down to self-love. So in a universe that is all one, when you're loving something else, ultimately you are loving yourself. Because, as we just said, if oneness applies, then you are also your worst enemy. You are also your best friend. I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, if everything boils down to self-love, why haven't I written that book yet? That kind of kicked me into high gear about the fact that that was really the hot button issue that I needed to be talking about.
It almost seems like a cure-all. Like if you could, really master self-love, it's like everything would fall into place.
100%. In fact, it's the shortcut to enlightenment.
It seems odd that it almost seems egocentric, but it's in fact, like you said, if we're all one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let's talk about the book itself. So
Okay.
the first quarter of the book it describes your journey from self-hate to self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Then the rest of the book covers how to manifest self-love in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a chance to read an early draft of your outline in your book proposal when you were looking for an agent. And it seems to me, and I may be getting this wrong, but that your story of your personal journey expanded perhaps longer than you had originally intended. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about writing that section and how it evolved to the finished story.
I actually didn't intend on writing it at all. Ironically, I'm one of these authors that has a very hard time with the idea of narcissism. Because in my childhood, humility was everything. And so basically, I've had this habit, essentially, as a writer of not including enough stories, and especially not personal stories, because I'm the kind of person that when I get to let's say that you're reading a self-help book and you get to a place where the person's like, look what I did with this client of mine, I kind of roll my eyes and I'm like, yes, we know that you're awesome, get to the stuff that's actually going to help me. So I tend to cram my material full of all kinds of this is how to do it practically in your own life and don't think about me type of thing.
Right.
But when I ended up getting this deal with Hay House, the publisher, they wanted me to put my personal story in there. And they were like, you absolutely have to put it in because people need context. And I resisted it like hell, but I was like, all right, fine. So I went back in and included that actually after the manuscript was already submitted.
Interesting. Was it difficult to write? Because, I mean, a lot of times when you're writing something about your own life, especially you're projecting there, right? When you're actually reliving it, and if the time you're projecting isn't all that pleasant, it can be a traumatic experience. Was that difficult?
What was hard for me was knowing what people want to hear about versus the details that are interesting to me, because we all know as writers they're not necessarily one and the same. But I'm one of those writers that doesn't really find anything difficult to write about.
Disclosing that kind of stuff wasn't
No.
difficult for you, or even just going through it again?
No, in fact, I do a lot of that in my career. The thing about being in the public eye is that everybody wants to know about your personal experience, so I've gotten really used to exposing that aspect of my life. It wasn't like I was exposing anything for the first time. I was just kind of putting it in a timeline that made it make sense to people.
And I think one of the most powerful parts of the book are your stories and your metaphors. They do such a good job of conveying what you're trying to say.
Oh, man.
So how long did it take to write the section on the 29 tools for self-love? Because there's so much content there. It's so meaty. some of those chapters could, like I said, could easily have been expanded into books themselves. I'm just wondering. It seems like
Ready? You ready for this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Originally I wrote a 556 page manuscript. What you're reading today in this book is half of what I wrote.
Wow.
Yeah, and so basically the whole thing, the 500 and 500 plus manuscript took me 3 months exactly.
3 months. And so, okay. Wow, there's a lot there. So how did you do that? I mean, was it all day, every day, or?
I'm one of those people who kind of channels writing.
Sure, a lot of people do that.
Yeah, so basically it's the thing where I actually liken it to the birth process, where it's like you wake up one morning and it's like, I have to start writing. And so I tend to be the kind of person who will I'll sit down at the computer and I have no idea how much time has gone by. It'll be, potentially one day it'll be all day. The next day, maybe I won't write. It flows through me. But with that one, I was sitting down probably 6 hours a day, every day.
Well, I can understand that, like me, if I'm writing a novel and I'm making stuff up, it's easy to just let that loose. But what you've written is very structured and very well organized. Did you outline it, or was it just flow of consciousness?
No, it was total flow of consciousness.
That's amazing. Well, whoever's like dictating to you, they're quite organized. That's great. So one of my favorite stories is from the first part of the book, is the glass of water story. Can you relate that story?
Basically, I was having the hardest time ever figuring out how to apply self-love to my own life. And I was one of these people who wasn't allowed to love themselves at all. So any kind of positive affirmation focused at the self, or any kind of self-loving act, was innately something that made me feel even worse of a person. I basically thought about this, like, how am I going to, if I can't show myself love, how am I going to get any kind of self-love in? And I figured, oh my gosh, as an extrasensory, I have been able to see the effect that intention has on water. So if I can focus love towards something else into the water and then drink the water, then I'm taking that vibration in. But it's kind of like coming in the back door. I ultimately ended up calling this particular step the Trojan Horse, because your body and yourself never sees it coming. It's sort of like the self-hate says you can't love yourself, but go ahead and love someone else so that you end up depleted and expend all your resources. So when you're focusing at that water with an attitude of, let's say you're focusing love towards your son or love towards your pet cat or something into the water, your ego goes, okay, that's fine, go ahead, because you're expending energy anyways. And it doesn't expect that the next step you're going to take is putting that right inside you. And so it's almost like your body goes into an absolute panic when you do that. And it's like, wait a minute, system shut down, meltdown, what just happened? So
yeah, you described that it took a while for you to be. I mean, you said it was almost like you're describing, like you had stomach cramps.
Yeah, it was horrible. My whole body revolted. It was too much of a different vibration than the one I was currently in. It was like there was an aspect of my ego structure which was identified with the idea of being good, and self-punishment meant being good. And so doing any kind of self-love meant that I was having a complete grand scale meltdown as a moral and virtuous person. And so the ego essentially had to crack away in that moment and make room for a much more pliable self, the self that is capable of showing love towards the self. And so I came in the back door in that way by putting love into water and then drinking the water for a lot of weeks before my body actually took it in. To begin with, it made me sick as hell. I ended up on the floor of my kitchen bawling,
Wow. Well, so I would say if love is the highest energy, that it probably is the best practice to project love and to do that. I mean, so it took like 5 minutes for you to just like focus love into this water and then to drink it, right? But I mean, could we do that with any kind of, success or whatever? Okay.
Yes, you could do anything like that. You could do it with food too, not just water. It's just that water tends to structurize itself according to the intention that's around it much easier than other things. So water is perhaps the easiest substance to use when it comes to influencing and causing something to adopt a specific vibration.
Well, one of the things I found really interesting about your book was that you talk a lot about making happiness a priority. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about happiness versus delayed gratification. So, for example, the process of writing a book is certainly fulfilling, but usually not every step of the process from starting that, page one to the final publication is going to make you absolutely happy. So, certainly there are parts of the process that, require delaying gratification to get through them. So can you speak a little bit to the balance between, seeking happiness in the moment versus kind of having to tough through some of those times for, a payoff in some future date?
I think when it comes to that delayed gratification thing, it's really the way that we're looking at the task in front of us that's the problem. I think that it's actually possible for us to enjoy each step if we have the right focus. And mostly it's what we're making things mean that cause us to suffer. So as an author, I had a hell of a time, honestly, with the publishing process. It's sort of funny when you said you wanted to do this interview, I'm like, great, this is going to be uplifting. But when I was in the middle of that publishing process, I had a lot of those moments where it was like, okay, I'm a writer. I don't want to deal with any of this editing stuff. But what was really causing me pain was the fact that I was making editing mean that I did something wrong. So it was not the process itself that was causing me pain. It was the meaning that I added to the experience. So exactly. Once I saw that, there really didn't seem to be a contradiction, or there didn't seem to need to be a balance struck between doing stuff you hate doing and doing stuff you like doing. It was more like, oh, I'm just, the only thing getting in the way of me liking every step of this process is what I'm making it mean. So I made that my practice. How do I challenge and question that aspect of it? And I think it's really critical for authors, to really look at that. What am I making this mean? Because the publishing process, to be quite honest, is I think one of the most painful processes you'll go through as a writer.
It can be, definitely. But also for you, because you were like, cutting out half your book. So that's that's tough, and so that's our baby, right? And so to see that torn out was and that's not just sounding meaning that you did something wrong. That's basically, cutting out half of your baby, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very hard, I think, as an artist to relate to the end product when it comes to writing. It's a very rare author who is capable of keeping their manuscript the way they want it, because the publisher wants it sold. And so what they want to do is design it so that it's going to be received by the masses.
Right.
And obviously, as an artist, not everybody's going to receive you,
Right, sure.
the way that in your raw, uncut form. So you're sort of going, this would be interesting to think about, because I think a lot of authors, we tend to really go into a self-hate shame spiral when we're a part of that process without realizing this. It's completely understandable as artists why we would feel so crappy. Could you imagine Van Gogh or a painter putting their painting in front of somebody and having them be like, well, you really do need to add more yellow, because honestly, when you walk in the room, the red just overwhelms the piece. So just add yellow. Or in fact, I'm going to have my people add yellow. Could you imagine? Van Gogh would be like, where's the nearest lighter?
Right.
So I think first and foremost, we have to have a little bit of compassion for the fact that it's a very unique art form, in that when you get published as a writer, your final piece is going to be, I guess, manipulated by other people. And so we have to develop, I think it's an opportunity, I should say, for us to develop a kind of, I guess, a spiritual practice out of the writing itself and out of that process, because like I said before, it causes you to have to look at the coloring you're putting on things, like, what am I making this mean? That's a real doorway into consciousness. Oh, if I'm making this mean that I did something wrong here, or that this is not good enough, obviously I've got issues with being good enough. And so that's an opportunity for me to even step into or face my demons relative to not feeling like I'm good enough. It's all going to come up during that publishing process.
Right, and that makes me feel a little bit better, because your book is like, oh, Teal's so enlightened. I wonder how she felt like when she had, got rejections or had editing process. So it sounded like even when you were searching for the happiness in the moment, there were some bumps in the road.
Oh hell, okay. There were so many bumps along the publishing process, and it's something I feel like a lot of us that are published authors really need to talk about, because I feel like there's a major misconception about the way that this business works, and I was unprepared for it, and most authors are unprepared for it. And so it's almost like you're so excited, you're writing on that inspiration, and then you hit a wall at 70 miles an hour when you kind of confront the way that this business really works, especially in today's world where publishing right now is changing so incredibly that even the publishing houses themselves are kind of scrambling to try to keep up with that change.
What would advice, if you were going to like send an email to you, just be, when you had finished the book and, the fun part, and you had given birth to this, wonderful project, to give you self-advice for the next piece of the process, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself the rather harsh truth, which is that right now what publishing houses are looking for is not authors, it's people who are going to sell books, and there's a big difference between the two. So like, for example, when I went to a lot of publishing houses with this book and nobody wanted it. In fact, I turned it into Hay House and they didn't even know that I had the manuscript into them. What happened is that I ended up getting so famous on my own through YouTube that I ended up pulling the same audience in London that they pulled for their I Can Do It event. And when you do something like that in the spiritual field, you start to really get on people's radars.
I see.
And so basically they came to me and offered me a contract, having no idea that I had ever turned a manuscript in.
That's amazing. So you got in through London, not through the U.S.
Yes. And U.S. was like, we want her over here. And basically I had a very intense sit-down conversation with the CEO of the company where he said, the reality of publishing today is we're not really into books. Books are an accoutrement to a career, and it's the career that essentially sells.
Right.
So the reality is, if you don't have a following already, your likelihood of getting published is almost nothing.
Right. If that's definitely true for nonfiction. Right.
Yes.
But in terms of, though, let's talk about in terms of manifesting that acceptance, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you think? I mean, so obviously you put it out there. You wanted this book to be published, and it manifested. I mean, you met me. I introduced you to Rita. It all just kind of fell through. Not the way you wanted, right? The how wasn't what you expected. But I'm sitting here, and here's your book on the desk. And so, What would you say about how it unfolded?
Honestly, I got to the point where I didn't care whether it was published or not. And I think that's probably the healthiest place that an author can get into. And I think that in today's world, because we've got self-publishing, it really affords us a backup plan.
Right.
Because it's like your book is going to be in your hands in today's world, no matter whether it's published through a traditional publishing company or not.
Right, exactly.
And so I think, we can use that to kind of soften our intensity about having to get it published. And at least it leaves a little bit of, I guess you could call it, vibrational leeway.
So basically you let it go, and that was what did it.
Well, I stopped caring because I made it more about the rest of my career, honestly.
Right, exactly. Okay, I love that. So I'm going to read a passage from your book.
Mm-hmm.
The road from self-hate to self-love is meant to be a road of ease, but only if we are brave enough to let it be easy. This was a very hard lesson for me because most of the time, as I struggled towards self-love, I would prevent myself from actually moving forward. Like you, like most of us, I accepted that my life was an intense struggle because we are so used to things being an effort and a struggle that we have difficulty trusting the feeling of ease. And I wonder if you could expand on that and how to make things less of a struggle. And if you could go back in time, like I said, to give yourself advice when things were hard, how would you advise yourself to make it less of a struggle?
We have this idea that it has to work in a certain way. I feel like the minute we do that, we get into a controlling type of attitude. And if you think about the nature of control, the second you're trying to externally control conditions or make something happen, you're doing so with a kind of effort or force that implies that there is great fear on the other side of that force. So it's almost like if I want to control something and I have to make it happen and I want to have it happen the way I want to have it happen, then you're almost limiting the opportunities that could come to you and through you. I feel like what we can do is practice this idea of if I set forth an intention, then the universe innately is going to be aligning those opportunities, those people, those places, those things that are all a conjunction with that intention that I have set forth. My job is not to know how. So when most of us, let's say that we start out on a journey to publish our book, basically, we think we know how that's going to occur. We pick, I mean, oftentimes as authors, we pick the publishing house we want to be published through.
Right.
And it's almost like we keep limiting the universe and limiting the universe and limiting the universe until we're kind of requiring it to come through a space the size of a head of a pin. We're like, I want this thing, but it needs to come in this package.
Right.
Well, what if the best way for that to manifest is not come in that package? I can tell you for sure I did not think that I'd be getting a book deal based on the publisher chasing me because of some.
Right.
Well, I wouldn't have even thought of it as a possibility. I didn't think that they watched. So it's like you'll notice this over and over again with your whole life, and it just applies to those of us who are trying to get published too, where it's like you don't know how these things are going to occur. When you just put one foot in front of the other and you stop making it have to look a certain way, then suddenly there are opportunities that will present themselves, and then you just step into the opportunity. And I've never met somebody, by the way, writer or not, where their success did not work in exactly that way. Either they were like at a party and the guy right next to them owned a publishing house suddenly, or else they met a book agent on a plane flight, or else they knew somebody who knew somebody. And those kinds of connections is something that's being arranged by the universe itself.
Right.
So what I would say, essentially, going back in time to my prior self about this, how do we get into a path of ease, is stop trying to make it look a certain way. You don't know how these things are going to happen. And so let the sort of magic of the universe unfold according to your grand intention.
So it's not just trust, it's intention. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, most people can't trust. I mean, the word trust is kind of like a hypothetical for most of us.
Sure.
And if I say, oh, just go ahead and trust, it's like, oh, great. Well, I can tell myself trust, but I don't really actually feel that. That's why I feel like the energy of ease or relief is so much more accessible.
I see, yeah.
It's like, I know whether in this moment I feel that tension in my body that's associated with having to make things a certain way or control. Likewise, I can also feel what ease feels like when I'm just saying, you know what, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I know I want it to have it happen. And I'm going to allow the universe to present that opportunity to me.
It's so much better than just trusting that it's going to happen, but just to set the attention and say it's going to. I don't know how, but yeah.
Yeah, and so like in accordance with the book that I wrote,
yeah.
Why would we do this? We would do it. See, and somebody in my position who's able to see vibration and understands how that works into the grand scheme of the universe will tell you that is what actually creates manifestation. But let's just pretend that you don't believe in manifestation and that's just a whole bunch of new age hooey to you. At least in the moment, you can recognize that you have one option. You either get to exist in a state of stress and tension, or you get to exist in a state of ease. That's your choice for all moments of the day. I can either feel better or worse. I can pick a thought that feels better or worse. I can take an action that feels better or worse. So which one am I going to choose right here in this moment? So I would say do that because it feels good. The fact that it is actually the key to manifestation should be just like a secondary thought.
Right, and that's the key, not just to do that, but to realize that we have that option, right?
Well, yeah, so you ready for this? Those of us that want to get published, why do you want to get something published? Because it would make me feel a sense of significance. Why do you want a sense of significance? Because it would make me feel valued. Why do you want to feel valued? Because feeling valued feels good. Why? So why are we wanting to publish a book? Because we want to feel good. We're ultimately doing everything in our lives because we think it will make us feel better. So what happens if we just take out the middleman, and in this situation the middleman is getting a book published, and we say, I just want to feel good.
And just decide to feel good, yeah. Still, it seems so simple, but it's a tall order.
Oh, I know it's a tall order. My gosh, I wouldn't be in business if it was super easy.
Right, true.
I could just walk out on stage and be like, look, this is the key to the universe. Now I'm going skiing.
Right. So you talk a lot about self-love and happiness being one and the same. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, what I noticed when I started observing people who love themselves versus people like myself, who quite frankly didn't, is that the major difference was that people who really loved themselves prioritized how they felt above everything else. That means if they walked in the room and there was dishes to do that they didn't want to do, or they could, say, watch a TV show they really liked, they would watch a TV show. It was like I was consistently watching them make that choice. Where choosing self-love meant choosing what felt the best to me in this moment. I started to realize that was really the absolute key decision when it comes to self-love, is I choose to care how I feel above everything else. It's like the most self-loving act. And it makes sense even when you think about a good relationship. So let's say you and I were in a committed relationship. If I cared about you and how you felt, and that was my number one priority, you can bet that I would keep feeding my energy into the relationship and the relationship would be good. And then let's say you did the same. If you did the same to me, our relationship would be absolutely amazing. So we have to address ourselves as if we're in a relationship with ourselves, and that's ultimately what we're doing. We're saying, look, my number one priority is how you feel. Right. It's kind of it seems really simple, and it is really simple, but it's those small moments that we take for granted where we're like, oh, I guess I'm just going to do it anyways. Well, 20 times of just going to do it anyways leads you to a miserable life. That's honestly what it does. And so like those of us who don't like ourselves, we love to tell the story of, well, if I don't do it, then it's just never going to get done, and everything's, all hell's going to break loose. But what I noticed when I was watching people who, yet again, prioritize their happiness and the way they felt because they loved themselves, is that those things they didn't want to do naturally kind of took care of themselves. It was like, I don't want to do this, so suddenly there's a person who does want to do this that's popped up in my life. So those of us that were struggling like crazy were the ones who were unwilling to look at a different way of doing it. We just kind of wanted to shoulder all of the burden ourselves.